Lenovo. How you confuse me so. That is the theme for today's video. Leave a like and subscribe if you like that rhyme. Anyways, this is the Legion Pro 7i from Lenovo, and I'm confused. I like it, and I also don't. So yeah, let's get into it. You know, Lenovo is one of the top brands for gaming laptops, right? And for some reason, they love to change this thing like every year. And a lot of those changes are not very welcomed, and some are. But do any of those changes really matter? Do they make it a bad laptop? Probably not for a lot of people, but there are some things that just irk me and I cannot get past it. So here we go.
But really quick, and I promise I'm not just trying to show off my guitar collection behind me, which, you know. But let's talk about optimization for a second. As tech enthusiasts, we all love optimization. Optimize your FPS in games, optimize your wattage used, optimize your temps, optimizing your setup, your desk, your chair, all that stuff. But what about optimizing your life, okay? What about optimizing your mental health, right? Even the perfect laptop will not help you if you're feeling overloaded in your life. So that's what brings me to today's sponsor of this video, BetterHelp. Now, therapy isn't always easy, but that's BetterHelp's mission, is to make therapy easier. They'll connect you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you unbiased advice. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire and they'll match you with a therapist in as little as a couple of days. And if it's not the right fit, then you can just switch at any time, no extra costs. It's super simple. On Trustpilot, they've got over 7,000 reviews with an average rating of 4.3. So if you've been thinking about something like this, now might be a good time to try, because I have 10% off of your first month if you click on the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/JoshCravesTech. Again, that's betterhelp.com/JoshCravesTech. All right. And once you're optimized up here, you can be optimized anywhere, including your KD and Battlefield. You really need to work on that. Anyways, back to the video.
So, I mean, you know, it's a sturdy laptop, right? It's got a metal lid. Some people might call this design sleek. Some might hate it. And that's one thing we're going to talk about. You've got a beautiful OLED display, and it has a lot of power and a good cooling solution. So this puts this laptop as one of the top spots for performance in 2025. And the Legion Pro 7i always has been like one of the top performers every single year. So it's not any surprise there. Like, it's a beast. There's no doubt about that. And sometimes you can find these on a pretty good sale. Like on the Lenovo website, there are some crazy discount codes that happen sometimes. Nothing like how I've seen the HP Omen Max go for so far this year. Like, this thing has been going for crazy cheap. But this is probably the next best like performance per dollar machine. So yeah, this is the RTX 5080 config. It's a full 175 watt GPU, but I'll try to give you an idea, like I always do, for how the other GPU options will perform as well. So you can be pretty well informed no matter which one you're going to get. On the CPU, it has the Intel Core Ultra 275HX. Now, this is not to be confused with the Core Ultra 285H or 185H. I know Intel changed all the CPUs to be Core Ultra now. That doesn't mean that they're all efficient, battery-friendly CPUs. So it's really important to distinguish the HX and the H with Intel, okay? Despite, you know, what they're calling it. Like, this is technically a successor to the Raptor Lake chips that we saw, the 14900HX, 13900HX. Like, very high peak power, not great battery life, okay efficiency. And I believe these come with an AMD configuration as well. But either way, when it comes to like a peak performance chip, you're going to get about the same level of performance whether you go Intel or AMD. There is no efficient CPU option, so you're kind of stuck with, you know, the battery hungry CPU here, unlike the HP Omen Max, which actually has an AMD 375 or 370HX option. And I know that has an HX in it, but those are actually battery friendly chips. Those are like the only exception to that rule, because AMD is terrible at naming things. So anyways, I saw this guy at CES and I thought it looked a little sleeker at CES than it does in person, which, you know, is whatever. I mean, I do like the flush, like flat top. That does look pretty cool rather than having it kind of protrude out a little higher on the back. However, the back is where I have a bit of a problem. So this is very Alienware. Like, let's be honest, like that's straight off an Alienware laptop. I feel like for some reason, even though Alienware is not popular other than like the name, Lenovo was like, yeah, you know, the thing that people love about us, you know, like being really stealthy, looking like a business laptop, you know, not really looking too gamery. This year they said, nah, we're going to look super gamery and everyone's going to know. So I feel like even with the LEDs off, like the back still looks so exhausty. You know, it's big, it's thick. Like, this is probably the thickest 16-inch laptop that I've seen other than like the Alienware Area 51. It's also pretty darn heavy at about 6 pounds, just like the HP Omen Max 16 here. The Omen Max 16 is a little bit thinner, and you can tell that it has like more of a sleek body than the Legion here, which has more of a thick body, especially at the back where you see like the exhaust vents. Like, that is a chunky piece of plastic. And yeah, there's quite a bit of plastic on this guy. Like, this is one of the things I'm just a little conflicted on. And I know a lot of people can look past this, but as somebody who loved the Legion Pro 7i from 2021, it pains me a little bit to see this. You know, that was a full metal, full performance, like RTX 3080 laptop. And it was a little bit heavy, but it was actually decently thin, and it had cool RGB that you could turn off, and it looked like a business laptop straight up when you turn that RGB off. Like, you would not know for a second that it was a gaming laptop. That one had a glass trackpad. There was like no plastic on it. Like, I hope you guys see where I'm coming from, right? Like, this isn't super cool to me for a company to go from, you know, what was an amazing laptop. It was their Pro series, like the best of the best. And then now the Pro is like fairly plasticky, pretty thick, and, you know, plastic trackpad. It has less premium parts and not nearly looking as stealthy and cool as it used to. And I totally understand that there's sacrifices you have to make for, you know, cost, for performance. I get that. But at the same time, it's just like, man, like, this could have been amazing if they had taken a page out of HP's book, even out of Asus's book. Like, I feel like Lenovo should stick to doing what they do best, making a stealthy, sleek Pro laptop. But I don't know. I mean, that is a very subjective take. So just take that how you will. I just had to rant a little bit because that's one of my number one gripes with this machine. And I saw it a lot in the comments when it got first announced. Yet there's a lot less people complaining about it now that it released. So I don't really know what happened. Like, a lot of people were like, oh, I can't believe this. You know, it looks like Alienware. And then it releases and everyone's like, oh, it's pretty cool. So I don't know. But yeah, just like the Omen Max 16, this is a heavy laptop, right? Like, it feels completely different than holding like a Zephyrus G16. Like, this feels like a toy almost. Like, it's super light. And then this feels like it, you know, your arm's about to fall off. What makes it worse too is the 400 watt charging brick that it comes with. What are we doing, guys? Why are we going up to 400 watts now? That is crazy. And I feel like it's kind of unnecessary. Like, give me like a 330 watt GAN charger that's like half the size and I'm happy. And the Omen's pretty guilty of it too, with a 380 watt that's like just about the same size. Like, these charging bricks are getting bigger every year and it's starting to get crazy. So yeah, it's not winning any medals in the portability department, but again, it's not trying to. Otherwise, I mean, the black color is really nice. It is sort of a fingerprint magnet. Like, you can see the fingerprints popping up just as I'm touching it here, but still not quite as bad as the Razer Blade 16. I think that's still the king for like worst fingerprint magnet. Overall though, I mean, the hinge feels super sturdy, and even though, you know, a lot of it is plastic, it still feels good. Plus, you know, you got the little light bar on the front, so, you know, that's pretty cool. And I like the RGB like logo too, you know. I do like the little touches like that. Even like the little grill underneath the display, it doesn't look really bad. It actually looks kind of neat. Otherwise, I mean, you know, it's whatever. Typing experience, amazing. Like, the Legion keyboards are without a doubt a lot of people's favorites. Even though I'm not a big fan of like the U-shaped caps, and I'm really not a big fan of an off-centered keyboard that has a number pad. You know, that's just a personal preference thing. I just don't like those. But it is no doubt a great keyboard. I do have a little bit of a problem with the plastic trackpad. Like I said in my Omen review, like, it's 2025. We should not be having plastic trackpads on pro level laptops that are costing thousands of dollars. That is craziness at this point. Especially when this very same laptop used to have a glass trackpad 4 years ago. But yeah, here's the sound sample. Now, the display here is actually pretty interesting because although it is technically the same exact display as every other 16-inch OLED gaming laptop this year, it has a 1 year newer manufacturing date. So it's technically the second generation of the display that you're seeing on like the Blade 16, Zephyrus G16, Omen Max 16. And I'll show you where the subtle improvements are with the second gen panel. So the base specs are pretty much the same as all the others out there. It's 1600p, which is QHD+. Please stop calling it 2.5K. That is driving me crazy. It's QHD, 60x10 aspect ratio, 240 hertz refresh rate, so nice and smooth. And yeah, it's OLED, so beautiful. The color gamut is nice and wide. It covers 100% sRGB, 100% P3, and 91% Adobe RGB. So very color accurate, very vibrant, and a delta E of 0.29, which is really good. So very color accurate, great for creators. And by the way, the variable refresh rate frequency starts at 48 hertz. So games that are running under 48 FPS, you might actually notice screen tearing, but I think that's only when you're in Optimus. I think when G-Sync is active, it's the entire refresh rate. So just something to note. When you're in SDR, the brightness is about 560 nits peak, which is very good for OLED. Although I did notice whether you're in Optimus or DGPU mode, it kind of affects the range of brightness. So for example, like 75% brightness in Optimus mode was really dim compared to DGPU mode for me, although about 100% was about the same. Now, when you're in HDR, that's when things get interesting. So you can hit 750 nits on a full white screen, which is really good for OLED, you know, especially compared to gaming monitors out there, which can only hit like 250 nits on a full OLED screen. So that's awesome to see. And then smaller windows, this is where things are getting interesting. 1100 nits peak. Keep in mind, this is only in small windows. So maybe like, you know, the sun in the corner of your screen or like a spotlight on your screen. Like that's when you're going to see that peak brightness really come out. You can see it here next to these other laptops. Like it does look a little bit brighter, but in normal HDR use, it's not that much different. It's just really when those highlights come through, that's when you really start to see the difference. So I wouldn't call it night and day. And I actually don't think the average person would even notice unless you had, you know, this one and like a G16 or Omen Max 16 right next to it, you know, because those guys can still hit almost 500 nits in SDR and then about 750 nits in HDR. So it's not an incredible difference outside of those highlights. And it does look like they slightly altered the subpixel layout for the second gen. So not really sure why. It could have been like, you know, to further improve on the burn-in prevention or text clarity, but it does seem to still be S-Stripe, which is the best for burn-in prevention and text clarity. So great to see that. It just seems to be a slightly tweaked one with like the blue pixel being a square this time. Yeah, really don't know what exactly that means, but you know, overall, I think the text clarity and everything looks pretty good. Now, one downside, of course, with OLED displays is burn-in. I think for the average user, you almost have to try to be burning this thing in, as long as you're, you know, using dark mode, using dark wallpapers, and you can go extra steps like auto hiding your Windows taskbar or using screensavers, things like that to help prevent it even further. I don't think it's going to be a problem really for the average user, but I know some people were unhappy to see that there is no built-in pixel refresh or pixel shifting happening, maybe at the BIOS level, but I didn't see it in the Legion software at least. And the last sort of con with this display, and it's not really a huge deal, but on certain shades of gray, like darker colors, you can sort of see almost like this dirty screen effect. It's really hard to notice, but again, this is a Samsung panel and they make all of these OLED displays for every OLED gaming laptop, and it's prevalent even in their tablet screens and things like that too from Samsung. So, you know, it's just a byproduct of the technology. It's not perfect, although I would say the average person, again, will not notice this, or at least not to a degree where I would think it would bother you. It definitely doesn't bother me at all. I think this display is overall just beautiful, and I definitely prefer it over your average IPS display. One thing that unfortunately I think is going to hold a lot of people back is the display reflections on this thing. It is a straight up mirror. And I'm not sure why they did this, but it is definitely the most reflective panel I've ever seen. It doesn't have like the flat bezel Gorilla Glass display that like the G16 does. Instead, it has a fairly thick plastic bezel with a plastic display coating, which is not good for reflections. And you can tell by just even tapping it, there's a different sound. And there's like sort of a wobbly, sort of warpy effect on the display. It doesn't look like it's a flat panel. Now, when you're actually using it, like as long as you're not in something super dark or, you know, a black screen, you're really not going to notice this, but I just had to point it out because, again, if you're very sensitive to display reflections or you're outdoors a lot, this might not be the best option for you. Legion Pro 7i webcam test. Not terrible. All right, so ports, and that's where my next biggest complaint comes in on this laptop. And I think a lot of people are probably going to feel the same, and I know they feel the same because I saw a lot of hate comments when it first got announced. And yeah, I get it. Like that's what this laptop used to be known for, is this right here. This used to be all ports. And now it's not. It's just ventilation now. So all the ports have been moved to the left and the right of the laptop, which for a really thick laptop like this, I've come to realize that it makes a lot less sense. Like for a really portable laptop like a Zephyrus, it makes sense to have, most of the ports on the left and right because you're probably moving a lot. You're unplugging a lot. You're moving from desk to desk, from room to room, throwing it in your bag, whatever. But for a laptop like this that is clearly designed for, to be on a desk most of the time, having the ports on the back was a pretty key feature. I know a lot of people who chose Legion specifically just for that, just so they can have a really clean desk setup. You can't do that anymore on the 2025 model. So yeah, that's really the part that bothers me, is just that they took that away. And I get it, like cooling, yes, but like, maybe decrease the CPU wattage like 20 watts or so. It's not going to kill anyone, and give us back those rear ports. Like, come on. Okay, so on the left side, you've got your power input, of course, HDMI 2.1, so 4K 120 hertz output with G-Sync, connects directly to the NVIDIA GPU. You've got two USB Type-C ports, one of which is 3.2 Gen 2, and the other is Thunderbolt 4. Don't know why they didn't go with Thunderbolt 5 here, since they definitely had the space to do it. It's usually just like another addition to the motherboard, but maybe they're just saving that for next year. I don't know. The one on the left here connects directly to the NVIDIA graphics. The other one connects through Optimus. So it goes through the integrated graphics first and then to your NVIDIA GPU. Next to that is a USB-A 3.2 Gen 2 port. And then coming over to the right side, we've got Ethernet, your webcam privacy shutter. You've got two more USB-A ports, although these are 3.2 Gen 1, so 5 gigabits per second instead of 10. Not really sure why, but it's fine. And then you've got your headphone audio combo jack here. Now, as far as the speakers go, it's nothing to write home about. I mean, it's just like pretty much every other gaming laptop. Like, they're okay. You can get a decent sound out of them, but nothing crazy. And I don't know, I'm just kind of spoiled now that I've used like the Zephyrus G16 speakers. The Zephyrus laptops have like the best Windows laptop speakers I've ever heard, which makes everything look a little bit worse in comparison. But here's a sound comparison so you can see for yourself.
These laptop speakers sound good. Do they sound the way that they should? Which one do you think sounds best in this laptop speaker test? Laptop speakers getting better every year. These laptop speakers sound so loud and clear. Can you hear the noise? Did your eardrums get destroyed by these laptop speakers? Yeah, they're playing for you.
Okay, so battery life. Now, I got to preface this because I don't think most people are going to be buying this laptop for battery. But I was surprised to see like a lot of posts on the Legion subreddit, people complaining, hey, I can't get more than, 3 hours battery life on this laptop. What's wrong? And I'm thinking, maybe that came from the confusion around the whole Intel Core Ultra naming scheme, because people are thinking, okay, the G16 is Intel Core Ultra. That thing gets good battery life. So why doesn't this one, it's also Intel Core Ultra, right? But yeah, there's a huge difference with these CPUs. This is the Intel Core Ultra 275HX. Pretty much any Intel HX CPU is going to be about the same here, with very little battery life. Although they did improve efficiency, they didn't really do so at the 10 watt and below level. And that's where most of the battery gains are. So yeah, I scored about, my first few tries, I got about 3 hours. Eventually I got it to stabilize to about 5 to 5.5, but it is a little finicky because of the Legion software. You select iGPU mode, but if something is using the DGPU at any point, if it pings it at all, it doesn't actually disable it. So in some other laptop softwares like Asus, you can just hard close anything using the DGPU. You can force it into eco mode, essentially, where it only uses the iGPU. Your 5080 or 5070, whatever it is, it gets shut off completely. The Legion, it's like not a guarantee, at least I couldn't get it to be, but even when it was fully shut off, it was, like I said, a max 5.5 hours. And from what I'm seeing on Reddit, most people are getting less than that. If you're someone who's expecting all day battery life, this is not the machine for that. Although, it does have up to 140 watts USB-C charging if you buy the Lenovo adapter. So you do at least have the option for bringing a smaller charger around. Highly recommend that if you are planning to travel with this thing. However, internally, that's where this laptop really shines. It's a beautiful laptop on the inside. It's got a huge vapor chamber. Everything is just laid out so nice and neat with these little metal covers over everything. You got PTM on the CPU, PTM on the GPU. So you don't have to worry about anything, leaking over time. Like, PTM is good. Once it's applied, it's good pretty much forever. It might not get quite the same thermal performance as liquid metal, but for most people, it's probably worth the trade-off. You got 2 DDR5 RAM slots, which you can actually overclock these in the BIOS, and then you have 2 SSD slots. perfect. The stock SSDs are both pretty fast, so I mean, I have no complaints on the internals of this guy.
Okay, so fan noise is interesting. First of all, I'm not gonna lie, it's louder across the board when you're gaming on this thing compared to the previous generation. Although just during normal use, the fans are at a super low RPM that you can barely even hear, so I don't really have a problem with that. But I've definitely noticed this trend with almost every laptop manufacturer this year pushing combined wattage limits even further, and unfortunately that increases temperatures, which has to increase fans. And that's not exclusive to Lenovo. Asus is doing the same thing, MSI, Acer, HP. But I will say this laptop has a trick up its sleeves that I almost didn't catch, and it actually got released right before I sent it back. So I was able to do some quick tests with this new quiet performance mode that they released with BIOS 11, and it changes the laptop's behavior quite a bit. You can only activate it in the BIOS, and once you've activated it, it changes your quiet mode, your silent mode, and your balance mode completely. Your silent mode becomes basically unusable in games, but it turns the fans completely off. 0 decibels, 0 RPMs. So this is great for, if you're just trying to brute force the minimum noise possible and you don't care about the performance costs. I think it was amazing that Lenovo did this. I just wish it wasn't a BIOS change. I wish I could just do this in the software. Speaking of which, there is not enough fan customization in the software for me personally. It's nowhere near where I would like to see it. Asus, for example, lets you set very low minimum RPMs, like when you're manually changing your fans, and you can get like insane like silent mode performance, balance mode. You can set so many different parameters, CPU, GPU fan. Lenovo has very high minimum RPMs. So when you're changing your manual mode fans, they're like tuned to be loud. Like it's not meant for you to make them quieter in the manual mode with the custom fan curves. So anyways, that's just like a side note. Other major change from that quiet performance switch in the BIOS is the balance mode becomes god tier. Like this thing goes from like an average balance mode in gaming to a monster. It lowers the CPU wattage like when you're gaming like a decent little bit. For me, it went to about 35 watts, but the GPU wattage was at 163 watts in balance mode. That is crazy. Nearly full wattage in balance mode. Fans were 46.5 decibels, just about, getting almost the full performance of the machine. This is insane. This should have been a setting from the start with this laptop. I think that really would have changed a lot of the initial reviews, but I am glad that they added it. Again, I just wish it wasn't a hidden custom BIOS setting. And I wish it didn't change both the silent mode and the balance mode when I change that in the BIOS. Like I would love to have, the regular silent mode, but also have this goated balance mode. But anyways, let me illustrate this for you. So this is my fan noise to time spy graphics score ratio. This shows you how much graphics performance that you get for each decibel of fan noise. Keep in mind, fan noise is not a linear scale. So every decibel increase is pretty big and pretty noticeable. So going, for example, from 46 to 47 decibels is very noticeable to your ears. And every 10 decibels is a 2 times increase in volume, but a 10 times increase in sound energy. So just something to keep in mind. This is essentially, so the higher the blue bars here, the higher the FPS you'll get in most games, and the yellow bars, you want those to be lower. That's your fan noise in decibels. So you can see right off the bat in turbo mode, we are barely better than the previous generation Legion Pro 7i. And yeah, even though performance has increased a little bit, fan noise went up as well. So that's why they're basically tied. Now there is a bit of a GPU bias. Of course, the HP Omen Max 16 has a 5090. That's why it's higher up on this chart. What I did like about the Omen Max though, is its unleashed mode can actually get pretty low on fan RPMs while still maintaining very high performance. So I love the custom fan curves on that thing. And you can see, it went from 486 to 537 points per decibel just from setting a couple little fan changes. Now the balance mode, this is where I'm talking about. This is crazy. So the normal balance mode you can see gets 406 points per decibel. Nothing very spectacular here. It's actually a decent ways behind the previous generation in its balance mode performance per decibel, which is pretty sad. But then you activate the quiet performance mode in BIOS, and now we're getting 469 points per decibel, which is much higher points per decibel than you get in the stock turbo mode on this thing. And keep in mind, this is loud. Like this can easily be heard from the room over. And 46.5 decibels is pretty good. You're actually not going to be bothering the person in the room next to you with that. However, the Omen Max 16 still has that minimum fans in its unleashed mode that are just insane. And that to me is still the performance king for low decibel performance, but the Legion Pro 7i is a decently close second. And then in silent mode, again, it's here twice because the stock silent mode is pretty okay. You're getting about 380 points per decibel, a
a little bit better than the last generation of Legion Pro 7i, but a few decibels higher too. I mean, I think anything approaching 40 decibels in silent mode is crazy. That is way too loud for silent mode. Like, you really want to see them closer to 30 decibels here. But there's that new BIOS setting, and yeah, it's at the bottom here because it actually only scored like 4,000 in Time Spy on this, which is terrible. It's basically unusable in games outside of like, maybe something super old or like a 2D platformer, that you're playing at 1080p or something. But I just put 25 decibels here because that's kind of like the noise floor essentially. So, but yeah, crazy stuff. So overall louder, but again, that trick up its sleeve with that quiet performance mode, very cool. I like that they did that, but again, just wish it was in the software and not the BIOS. All right, so I want to touch on a few things with the software. Lenovo made a pretty big change this year. So they still have Lenovo Vantage, but they have a new software called Legion Space that you also have to use now. I don't like the idea of having two softwares. I never even liked that about like Asus, how they use Armory Crate and My Asus. Like, I wish it was just one. So yeah, Lenovo's doing the same thing now. So Lenovo Vantage is where you handle updates, BIOS updates, pretty critical stuff. So it's not good to get rid of this. But Legion Space is your main control software for this laptop. So everything from fans, wattage, performance, all that stuff, and a couple little gimmicky things, but whatever. Every laptop software has this. But yeah, you've got quiet mode, balance mode, performance, and custom. Each one gives you a different target of fan noise and wattage, which you'll see the differences in the temps and wattage section coming up. But keep in mind, there's a BIOS setting for quiet performance mode that actually changes the behavior of quiet and balance mode, which I just talked about in the fan noise section. And I'm going to come back to custom mode here in a second, but just want to point out a couple extra things, like your lighting profiles can be found right here. You can change the different effects. You can change the lights on the rear, on the logo, all that sort of stuff. There's also a few other random settings like performance optimization with machine learning, which it's kind of like a dumb little like AI gimmick that basically changes the power modes from, automatically has it at like quiet mode when you're just doing basic tasks, and then automatically changes it to performance mode when you start a game. I wouldn't really call it machine learning, but it's kind of like a set it and forget it kind of thing. Associate with system power mode makes it to where the Windows power mode aligns with your Legion Space power mode that you set. Optimized memory just closes certain apps and background tasks when you launch a game. Screen burn-in prevention, it just has a few settings here that can help reduce burn-in over time. You can automatically have it shift wallpapers, change the lock screen, blur the toolbar, dark mode, just basic stuff that is pretty much just Windows settings. And your GPU working mode, so a lot of people get confused here, but hybrid mode is essentially when Advanced Optimus is active. So hybrid mode can also be DGPU mode, depending on what you've set in NVIDIA control panel. You can see in the bottom right corner, this is a little icon that I can use to switch easily between DGPU or hybrid mode on the fly. So this is what I'd recommend for most people. It just makes it easier. Since this thing has Advanced Optimus, you don't really need to go to the dedicated DGPU mode that requires a restart, and it disables your integrated graphics completely. And hybrid iGPU only mode is essentially the same as the eco mode that you would see in other laptops, where the NVIDIA GPU is disabled instead, giving you the most battery life possible. This one is a little bit finicky because it doesn't actually do it right off the bat. It kind of has to wait for programs to stop using the GPU, and sometimes that doesn't always happen. So it's not always the most reliable. I wish it would kind of just brute force close anything using the GPU, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure they will improve on this in the future. Then you have hybrid auto mode, which is the same as like optimized mode on Asus, if you're familiar. So basically, as soon as you unplug the power adapter, it tries to switch to iGPU mode only. All right, now custom mode has a lot of settings. First of all, there's an extreme mode button if you want to just max out everything. This doesn't let you customize anything, but it gives you what it thinks is the best profile for, just maxing out the power. If you want to set your own custom one, you can do that here. I'm not going to go too in depth on every single one of these because there's a lot going on, and this is more for advanced users, and most of this is CPU related. So
So your long-term power limit, for example, is like your PL1. Your long-term power limit under crossload is like when the GPU is active, what you expect the CPU to run at for a longer duration. You can set the GPU's base wattage to as low as 80 watts or as high as 150 watts, which is a really good range. You can set your dynamic boost. There's also like a reverse dynamic boost, so how much you can take away from the GPU to give to the CPU. Kind of cool. CPU temperature limit, GPU temperature limit, and yeah. So, and then you've got fan curves here, which the minimums for these is unfortunately way too high. You can't really set this to be a quiet mode. It's essentially like meant to be a louder than normal mode. So, you know, while I do appreciate having some fan customization, it's not nearly as customizable as I would like for it to be, nor does it separate CPU and GPU at all. And then really quick, I'm just going to scrub through the BIOS so you can see some of the settings. This actually has a lot of BIOS settings compared to most other laptops, and a lot of them are pretty useful. I mean, there's a lot of stuff for undervolting, overclocking, a lot of extra little things here and there. So if you're someone who likes to tweak with a lot of settings, this is a great laptop for that. All right, to go a little more in depth on the CPU, you know, this is the Intel 275HX, which I've already mentioned. This thing has 24 cores, 8 P cores, 16 E cores, and it's hungry for power. It's not battery friendly. This thing can hit up to like 180 watts in a CPU only workload. That's a lot. It's essentially a desktop chip in a laptop. A lot of people were mad on the desktop side about Arrow Lake because it targeted efficiency and not really major performance gains. But on a laptop, that is the opposite. We love to see efficiency gains, and even though it didn't really give us much below like 10 watts or so, it's almost doubling the performance of Raptor Lake at that like 20 to 60 watt range, which is what we love to see on laptops, because that means lower temperatures, you know, lower fans. So as long as the laptop isn't like trying to push the CPU further, which this one kind of does, but you can generally see some major benefits from increased efficiency. And I have a specific chart that illustrates that, but first let's just talk about Cinebench R23, because this is the best representation of how a CPU performs in a all CPU workload when everything is just maxed out. So you can see the 275HX, by no surprise, is leading the pack. Just barely ahead though of the Flow Z13's AI Max 395 Plus, which is really funny to see a tablet almost beating these guys. And actually it kind of does at every other wattage level, which I'll show here in a minute. But yeah, it's not really a major improvement over, you know, the 14900HX, the 13950HX. Like, it's just okay. You know, it's not really anything that you would feel or notice, although there was a pretty decent improvement in the single core performance. Now, when we get into balanced and silent mode, that's where we're starting to see some differences here. So we're hitting about 30K. We barely lost any performance in balanced mode, and same thing in silent mode. We're leading the pack 25K, which is way better now than, you know, the last generation Legion Pro 7i. And then on battery, 22K, which is an extremely high score for battery. So yeah, that's where you're seeing these gains, is those lower wattage levels. And to really illustrate that point, I made a graph showing the power scaling of this CPU. So this shows you how the performance increases as the wattage increases. So on the left here is your Cinebench R23 scores for multi-core, and on the x-axis is your wattage. So as wattage increases, performance increases, but ideally for laptops, we want to see performance really high at the bottom left, because that's where you're going to see better battery life, better temperatures, better fan noise, all those other things. And you can see here, the 275HX is a huge jump up from, you know, the 13900HX, 14900HX. So those Raptor Lake chips are almost like half the performance of this guy, from everywhere from 20 to like 40 watts and all the way up, really. I mean, as it goes up, it still maintains a pretty big lead over Raptor Lake as far as performance per watt. Where it's losing though is to AMD, of course. So, you know, the AI Max Plus 395 from AMD is an insane CPU, and it's, you know, it was in a tablet, so I could only run it at a max of like 130 watts before it started throttling. But at all power levels, it beats the 275HX, and especially at that 10 watt to 20 to 30 watt range, it is a really big lead there. Even the HX370, same thing there. I really wish they would have put that CPU in here, at least as an option. And even the Intel 285H and 185H, those are the more power efficient chips. Again, you can see that at their 20 watt, 10 watt range, they are a good amount ahead of the 275HX. So that's where like the efficient laptops still win, is like these low wattage numbers, that battery life, the performance when wattage is low. And I also threw in MacBooks just as a comparison here, but you can see MacBooks still can beat this guy
in efficiency, especially the M3 Max and the M4 Max. You know, when they're running at 60 watts, it's basically the equivalent of this one at 80 watts. So those MacBooks and their efficiency, man, I'm telling you what. And I also like to look at single core power scaling too, because this is for like, you know, think about snappiness on battery. There's still a lot of programs that run off a single thread and even games as well. So, you know, you can see this one really suffers at 10 watts. It needs that wattage to run well. It's getting beaten by pretty much everything up until about 30 watts. And I like to throw MacBooks in here again, just as an example. They only need like 5 watts to hit basically the max performance. That's why you see MacBooks doing so good on battery, with great performance on battery and great battery life. So yeah, we still have a ways to go to catch up there. And I'm not a big fan of Cinebench 24, but here's the Cinebench 24 numbers for those interested. And yeah, there is the AMD 9955HX model, which is, from what I've seen, it's pretty comparable to the Intel one here. It's kind of just a matter of preference whether you prefer Intel or AMD. Either one is going to give you great CPU performance here. It's not like you're really going to see a huge efficiency gain going from one or the other, or huge, you know, performance gains going from one or the other. It's Jared's Tech has a pretty good video on this. I highly recommend watching that if you're confused between those two CPUs. Now let's talk about the GPUs here. So it starts at a 5070 Ti, although I have the 5080 model here, and you can get it up to a 5090. I will say right off the bat, I think this laptop is overkill for a 5070 Ti. I'll just come right out and say that. There's a lot more portable options that have a lot more premium features for about the same price. Because that GPU only goes up to 140 watts, you're not really getting the full potential that this laptop offers out of that GPU. Like at that point, you might as well just get like a Legion Pro 5i or just something else, because the 5080 and 5090 is where it's at here. This is the full 175 watts. That is the main draw of this machine. That is why a lot of people like this laptop, because you get full wattage GPU, full wattage CPU, and both can hit extremely high wattages at the same time. So I like to measure GPU performance using 3D Mark TimeSpy. Don't really trust TimeSpy's CPU benchmark anymore, but their GPU benchmark has been pretty spot on, and I think it fares better than Steel Nomad personally. But yeah, here you can see where all these GPUs sit. So the Omen Max 16 is a full wattage 5090. That's what you would expect to see if you bought the 5090 model of this Legion. This one's hitting about 23K, which is a little bit more than the 160 watt, which is really like 140 watt, 135 watt Razer Blade 16. You can see we're actually ahead of the 4090 at its full wattage from last gen, and a good bit ahead of the 130 watt 5090 in the Zephyrus G16. So yeah, wattage matters a lot this generation, at least at the 5080 and 5090 level. Plus, I found that these could be overclocked way higher than the 4080 and 4090 could. Like you could easily hit like plus 300, plus 400 core for an additional like 5% or maybe more GPU performance increase. And then in balance mode, you can see we're scoring almost 17,000, but instead if you use that BIOS setting where you get the quiet performance mode, that balance mode scores about 22.3 thousand, which is a pretty big jump up, and it would actually put it at the top of the charts here for balance mode. And then silent mode, we're hitting a little over 14K, which is a really good score. That makes this very playable for a lot of games. I mean, think about it. 14K in TimeSpy is essentially the same as a maxed out like 5070 in its turbo mode. So, you know, kind of NVIDIA's fault for making such a huge jump in performance between those GPUs. But hey, if you got the budget, you can essentially get 5070 level performance in silent mode on this guy. And then on battery, it doesn't actually do too well. It gets about 4800, really low score, surprisingly. But again, this thing is not meant to be gaming on battery. It is meant to be plugged in. That's just how it is. On USB-C, it's not terrible though, 7500. You can definitely play most games at like low settings with that. And we'll see how that fares in games here pretty soon. And then even though I don't feel like the Steel Nomad scores really reflect performance as much as TimeSpy, I'll still show them here. All right, so let's look at the thermals and wattage that the Legion Pro 7i runs at. This will be the same for the 5080 or 5090 model. Only changes being like the 5070 Ti only hits 140 watts max, so that one might run a little bit cooler than these guys. But yeah, I'm just using the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark here, which you can download the demo and run on your machine if you want to compare. I like to test things in GPU bound by setting it to 2560 by 1600, so QHD plus at the highest preset, DLSS off. That simulates, you know, GPU heavy games like Cyberpunk, stuff like that. And then I like to do it again at CPU bound settings, which is the lowest preset, 1080p. That simulates games like Counter-Strike, Valorant, more CPU heavy titles. So with the fans manually maxed out, you can see our combined wattage is insanely high, with that CPU hitting over 100 watts while the GPU is hitting pretty much its max power as well. And yeah, that's going to push the CPU to like 95 degrees, although this chip can hit up to I think like 110 safely, as it's designed to do so by Intel engineers. So not a huge concern, but yeah, I've seen people complaining about CPU temps, and that's why. I mean, your CPU is hitting insanely high wattages under load. And the funny thing is it barely comes at any performance increase over the stock turbo mode, which is hitting a much lower CPU wattage target, and of course hitting lower temperatures on that CPU because of that. But some people just like, that maximum wattage, so this is the option for those of you. And when the CPU does go down to about 70 to 80 watts or so in manual mode versus turbo mode, now you can see the CPU start to run cooler, and it's running pretty warm in turbo mode at the stock. But again, we're pushing a lot of wattage on that CPU. Yes, it's hitting like 95 to 100 degrees, and I'll show you how you can manage that in my recommended settings later. But again, this is by design by Intel, so it's not really a huge concern for me, but just so you know, there it is. Balance mode has about a 40 watt cap or so on the CPU, while the GPU is loaded up at about 95 watts. And those temps are pretty ice cold. They probably could have lowered the fans even more in balance mode here. Same thing with silent mode, probably could have had even lower fans. Hits about 65 watts on the GPU and up to about 30 watts on the CPU. Again, in the 60s on both, which is very cool. They probably should have lowered the fans here, but I can't complain too much. The temps are good. The performance is pretty good as well. But I've got to talk about, that BIOS setting that can switch up the quiet mode and balance mode completely. So check this out. Balance mode, if you enable the quiet performance mode in BIOS, you get 162 watts or so on that GPU, sometimes hitting 170 watts, with the CPU being maxed out at about 35 watts. Yeah, the temps are a little bit warmer than the stock balance mode, but it's still fine. It's actually not bad at all, considering it's relatively similar fan noise to the stock balance mode, but way more GPU performance. Whereas the silent mode, when you make that BIOS setting switch, it sucks. It's 35 watts on the GPU, less than 20 watts on the CPU. That is rough. We're getting like slideshow level performance here, but zero fans. I mean, hey. Okay, now when we're CPU bound, you can tell that GPU takes a pretty big backseat, going from like 175 watts down to like 90 watts or so now, which leaves a lot of thermal headroom for the CPU, so it can finally hit, that 90 to 100 watt range without hitting the thermal limit, or at least not as close to the thermal limit as fast. So you can see manual mode and turbo mode are both hitting about over 100 watts, where they kind of settle down to about 90-ish watts. And yeah, the temps are still hitting like high 80s to 90s, but the GPU is running ice cold here on both. So yeah, whether you're running turbo mode or maxed out fans, it's still pretty good temps right there. Balance mode seems to have about a 75 watt CPU target, so like upper 80s, low 90s or so on the CPU. And then silent mode has about like a 30 to 35 watt CPU target here, so running pretty ice cold. Again, it probably could have had the fans a little lower. And again, when we enable that quiet performance mode in the BIOS, you get a bit lower CPU wattage, about 60 to 70 watts, with occasional spikes up to like 90 watts or so. So still not too shabby at all for balance mode. And the silent mode, it just kind of sucks. I mean, 23 watts, temps are low. It's at least playable here, but it is like a third of the FPS as the others. So yeah, again, I really wish they would let you change these without going into the BIOS. Okay, and as for my recommended settings when you're using this laptop, I'm going to be honest, if this were my daily driver, I would probably just enable the quiet performance mode in BIOS and just leave it in balance mode 24/7. Oh, and make sure to, hit the overclock GPU just for a little extra performance. That's what I'm showing here. We're in Cyberpunk, where there is a tiny bit of a CPU demand due to like DLSS and all that. But yeah, the GPU is hitting 155 watts, CPU is sitting about 40 or so, and we're getting over 80 FPS at essentially ray tracing ultra settings here at QHD. So that's just really great performance, and I can't complain. I mean, that's like 46.5 decibels. It's good fan noise. This is just a super balanced performance mode, and I would just run it like that 24/7. But yeah, here's the stock turbo mode. I mean, you can see that CPU is running hot, and I'm cool with that, but look at this. This is barely any different than when I just had it on the balance mode earlier.
Like, yeah, the CPU is going up to like almost 90 watts, but the FPS is about the same. So that's what I'm saying. Like, these Intel HX CPUs this year don't really need that 90 to 100 watts of power to get good performance. It's kind of just overkill. What I would do in custom mode here is, first of all, raise that GPU to CPU dynamic boost down to 0 so that you're not taking any wattage away from the GPU to give to the CPU. You're going to set those first 3 CPU sliders to like 60 watts, like the power target, the PL1, and the cross-loading one. Set your GPU base wattage to 150 watts. That gives it, at the minimum 150 watts to the GPU. And of course, you can put a CPU temperature limit there. You don't have to do that. I just did that because just to show you that it works pretty well. And yeah, the rest of the settings you can just copy here, but look at that. You get 60 watts to the CPU, which is running way cooler than when we had, 100 watts going to the CPU earlier. And we're getting about the same performance. Like, the FPS is basically the same. My only gripe again with custom mode is the fans. You can't set it any lower than this, which is basically just as loud as turbo mode, if not louder. That's why personally I would choose to run it in balance mode and call it a day. But yeah, that's my recommended settings.
Now, I think creators are going to love this laptop. It gets really high performance numbers across the board. So let's look at that.
So first of all, latency mon, not too great if you're in DGPU mode or, Advanced Optimus, NVIDIA GPU only. But it is pretty good though when you're in regular Optimus mode. So I don't have any major complaints there. In Photoshop, it's near the top of the charts at over 9,000. Yeah, so that's a great result, and almost 9,000 in balance mode, still near the top, only really falling down in silent mode, where it's about middle of the pack here, and sadly being beaten by some, 4070, 5070 Ti laptops. And that's kind of the same case on battery. Balance mode on battery, not too bad, over 6,000, almost 7,000. Silent mode on battery, looking a little rough, barely over 5,000. So I would say if you are doing heavy work on battery, maybe use balance mode or just bring a USB-C charger with you. Looking at Premiere Pro, this is with the Puget benchmark. We're at the top of the charts, which is crazy actually because we're passing 5090 laptops. And that's because of that combined total draw power. The Omen Max, even though it has a higher tier GPU, it doesn't actually push the GPU and the CPU to higher wattages at the same time as Legion Pro 7i does. However, when you drop it down to balance mode, that's where you start to see the 5090 pull ahead in the Omen Max. And then in silent mode, not a bad result at all, but still most 5090s are beating it by a little bit. And then balance mode on battery, not bad, actually close to the top here. And for some reason, silent mode on battery in this one is actually, again, really good just for Premiere Pro for some reason. And in DaVinci Resolve, I don't know what happened, but this thing just demolished everyone. And I guess it had to be that combined total draw power because, yeah, we're scoring higher than the Omen Max 5090 by a decent margin, hitting almost 13,000, which is crazy. And still looking amazing in balance mode at like 11.3K, and even silent mode almost hits 10K. So really good scores for DaVinci Resolve. On battery, we're over 7,000, leading the pack in balance mode and almost leading the pack in silent mode too. And this is also one that I run on USB-C, and it's also pretty good here. It's with most other high performance laptops. And then lastly, I like to do a benchmark for music producers out there. So here I'm running Ableton. You can just download the demo and run this yourself if you want to see how your machine compares. It's basically just the stock built-in session that comes with the software. And we want this meter in the corner here to be a lower percentage. This is your performance meter. Lower is better. So this is one of our best results, pretty easily hitting about 14 to 16% in Ableton 11 and about 15 to 20, 21% or so in Ableton 12, which is a little more demanding. So very good considering this is running tons of tracks with tons of effects. Like, that is a great result for Ableton. So I think music producers will be happy with this. All right, so we've talked about every other aspect of this laptop. Now let's see how it performs in games. That is the biggest selling point of this particular laptop. So yeah, let's check it out. Starting with Apex Legends, you can see we're hitting 293, which is just barely less than the HP Omen Max. Again, that's that total combined power of the CPU and GPU there, especially with those 1% lows being that high. In Black Myth Wukong, we're, now it's GPU bound. We're a little bit behind the Omen Max here, but not by much, and way ahead of those lower powered 5090s and 5080s. Now, Black Ops 6, we're near the top of the charts, and in balance mode, we're tied with the Omen Max. So So yeah, that's really good to see, considering the Omen is a 5090. In Cyberpunk, I like to run this one in a few different settings because it can cover a lot of bases. First of all, the Ray Tracing Ultra preset, we are about 11 FPS behind the HP Omen Max, pretty much tied with the Legion Pro 7i 4090 from the previous generation. But again, we're way ahead of these thinner and lighter 5090 and 5080 laptops like the Blade 16 and the G16. In balance mode and silent mode, the gap closes quite a bit. Now some of these lower power laptops are surpassing us, especially in silent mode. Now, if we do ray tracing overdrive, so this is like maxed out with the default frame gen active here, this is giving us 104 FPS. Pretty crazy, you know, especially when you look at the Legion 7i from the previous generation, the 4071 hitting just over 30 FPS here. That is a massive increase. If we're in 4K, we're only about 7 FPS behind the HP Omen Max 16 here, which kind of goes to show the GPU performance increase between the two. And not to scare anyone here, but I did throw in the multi-frame gen charts just to show you. I know it's kind of a gimmick, but it does work pretty well in games like Cyberpunk. You know, you can hit basically 180 FPS, maxed out RT overdrive. That's a long ways from like the 20 or 30 or so FPS that you would get on like a 4070 laptop. Now, Forza Horizon 5, 153 FPS. This one did really well on the Omen Max for some reason, so decent ways behind it, but still a good result. In balance mode, we go down a little bit. Silent mode, same thing. We're losing to the 5090 Blade here, but not by a ton. And then in 4K, we're only 8 FPS behind the 5090 here in the Omen Max, a good ways ahead of these thinner and lighter laptops. Helldivers 2 is a great example of combined total draw power. Once again, this one really pushes the CPU and GPU to their max, so it actually surpasses the 5090 Max 16 in this one. So very happy with that result. In balance mode, you don't quite get that same total draw power, so it falls a little bit, but still not bad. Horizon Zero Dawn, we're again second place, right behind the 5090 Omen Max 16, about 6 FPS ahead of the last gen 4090 Legion Pro 7i. And then balance and silent mode, you know, not quite as impressive, but still really good. 4K, nothing surprising there, but a good result. And then 1080p, we're looking really good because of that 275HX. Now, Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a tried and true benchmark of mine. We've got a decent lead over the Legion Pro 7i with the 4090 from last year. A lot of that's because of the Ultra 275HX here. This one does have some reliance on the CPU. And then in balance and silent mode, it goes down the chart a little bit, but still a great result overall. 4K in this one, we are right behind the Blade 16 with the 5090, but still hitting over 100 FPS. And then in 1080p, we're pretty close to the top of the charts here. I don't know why the Blade actually won in this one, but hey. And just to illustrate how gaming performance is on battery, it's not great. We're hitting a little under 60 FPS at 1080p. Yeah, not the best result. But I mean, overall, gaming performance is pretty solid across the board. It's like, you know, sometimes it's neck and neck with the previous gen 4090. Sometimes it's a bit ahead because of that upgraded CPU. So even though NVIDIA didn't really give us too much of an upgrade on the GPU side, it still is a performance powerhouse, especially with all that wattage going to it.
All right, so pros and cons. This is an extremely powerful piece of hardware. It's giving you, you know, the most performance that you can get out of a 5080 or 5090 GPU, and the 275HX CPU is no slouch in this guy. You're getting your full money's worth out of both the CPU and the GPU out of this laptop. And thanks to that combo, it actually does surprisingly pass the 4080 and 4090 by a decent margin in most games. The fan tuning is pretty good. I mean, it's not like the best. It is pretty loud overall, but it's still decent fan tuning, with the balance mode being like the best, I would say. It has that beautiful OLED second gen Samsung panel, which is, it's unique this year. I mean, this is the only gaming laptop that has that. And even though I don't like that they split up the softwares into two this year, I still think Legion Space is an amazing piece of software. Legion Toolkit is also a great third-party software. I just wish it had more customization over fans. You have really advanced tuning of the CPU in the BIOS. You have really advanced tuning of the GPU and software. You know, everything from like undervolting to increasing the crossload. By the way, this has like the highest crossload that I've used out of a 16-inch gaming laptop. Being able to push like the CPU to like 100 watts while the GPU is almost at full wattage too, that's crazy. You know, you're hitting like 280, almost 300 watts of combined power, which is absolutely insane. And it has some of the best thermals out there, especially for the wattage output. Like, you cannot argue that is insane thermals for that much wattage. And I will give it to Lenovo. I mean, you can find this at a pretty good price when it goes on sale, and I do see discounts happen pretty frequently on the Lenovo website. So as far as performance goes in like the 16-inch space, it doesn't really get much better than this. Now the cons, you know, it's heavy. It's extremely thick, especially for a Legion Pro 7i. This is probably the thickest one they've made yet. The power adapter being 400 watts is crazy. It's huge. Doesn't really make sense. This guy can get pretty loud in turbo mode, hitting 52 decibels, which is another con, you know, the fan tuning. Like, I really wish there was a little bit more advanced fan tuning in the Legion software. You got the plastic trackpad, which I'm really not a fan of. Average speakers, you know, nothing crazy there. The battery life is not great, which comes with the territory. I mean, that's the CPU, unfortunately. And the last con I'm going to say is just the overall design. And like on its own, it's not bad. You know, if this was like the first Legion Pro 7i ever, like, cool. It's just the fact that it's downgraded over time. The fact that 4 years ago, this was a better looking and better built laptop is crazy. And I need to elaborate on this because it actually is a big part of the conclusion. We look at other brands, right? Like HP here. This is a huge improvement over their typical HP Omen line. Like the HP Omen 16s, the Omen 17s of the past, they had nothing on the Omen Max 16. Like that has a much more premium design. It's just gotten better. You know, it's a lot more metal parts. It's got the display upgrades. Like everything is moving upwards for HP. Asus, same thing. They had a lot of plastic laptops, magnesium alloy. Now they're moving towards metal. It's got OLED. It's getting thinner. It's getting better speakers, better everything. Meanwhile, HP is like charging less than everyone while giving all these premium features. And then you have Legion here, which the 2021 Legion Pro 7i should not be better than the 2025 Legion Pro 7i. Not talking performance, not talking wattage. I'm talking just the laptop itself. Simply put, that should not be a thing. Like things should be getting better. Like, yes, I'm thankful for the OLED display. Don't get me wrong. But like, you know, more plastic parts, plastic trackpad. The speakers aren't really that much better than they were 4 years ago. You know, it's looking more Alienware than it did 4 years ago. It's not as sleek. It's not as stealthy. You know, there's a lot of creaking noises. Like, and the 2021 model was quieter too, on top of that. Like, it just... And I'm really trying not to sound like I hate this laptop. I actually do really like it. Like, don't get me wrong here. This is an amazing piece of hardware. It's just really weird to see everyone else getting better every year. I just really want them to improve. I want them to get more competitive. And if you just recently got into gaming laptops, you probably don't even realize, but if you look at the 2021 and 2022 model of the same exact laptop, just Google them if you don't know what I'm talking about. Like, they are like night and day in comparison to this. That's all I'm saying. I'm all for, you know, more performance, better cooling. I get all that. But like design, this is a pro laptop. I want to see a pro design. You know what I'm saying? You know, if I want all of this, I'm buying Alienware. Like, that's not why I buy Legion. But anyways, I'm not making that like the sole focus of my conclusion. But that's just why I'm so conflicted on this guy. Like, I do love it. It's an amazing laptop. Like, on its own, it's not a bad looking laptop. It's just not the Legion Pro 7i that I know that had that identity. You know, it had a really solid identity. So otherwise, amazing performance, amazing cooling. And if that's what you're after, you're going to be super happy with this laptop. So, you know, and if you're keeping it at a desk, like no one's going to see that anyway. So whatever, you know, while Legion is getting a run for their money this year with the HP Omen Max 16 as far as performance per dollar, like this thing has been going on sale for like almost half price. I will say Legion still has really good discounts. If you keep an eye out, you can stack discount codes and all this sorts of stuff to knock the price down by quite a bit. So I'm happy with it. I think it's a good laptop overall. And I think the majority of people who buy this machine are going to love it. So either way, like, it's an awesome laptop. If you like it enough to buy it for yourself, I would really appreciate you using one of the links in my description as it helps support the channel. And of course, you know, hit that subscribe, hit that bell, leave a like, leave a comment. Anyways, I really appreciate you guys so much, and I'll see y'all in the next one.